Welcome, beautiful souls, to another episode of the Spiritual Catalyst podcast, where we talk about all things weird and woo. I am your host, Sarah Lyons, the founder of the newearthschool.com.au, and today we have Rachel Hardy with us to talk about Upper Limits Unlocked, Somatic Regulation for Effortless Expansion. Rachel is a sought-after intuitive coach and mentor, astrologer, and somatic practitioner. She guides conscious entrepreneurs and creatives to make their next leap in clarity, impact, and income while connecting even more deeply to their soul's purpose. So beautiful. Welcome, Rachel.
Thank you so much, Sarah. So happy to be here with you.
You're so welcome. I'm excited about this. And for the listeners who maybe haven't sort of dived into this sort of concept before, let's just quickly cover what is somatic regulation.
Great idea. So somatic simply means of the body. We're talking about working with our physical body. And when we're talking about regulation, we're talking about working with our physical systems and our physiology to regulate our nervous system. So often we're used to working, say, with stressful things from our mind and from our understanding, which is super helpful and super important. When we're talking about coming at something from a somatic direction, we could also call this a bottom-up approach, where instead of starting from the mind and kind of coming down into the body, we're actually starting with what is literally happening in my physical experience and tuning into that in a very connected and loving and listening way, so that we're feeling and sensing at levels probably much different than we're used to, because in our Western culture, we're typically not taught to feel our bodies. It's not a thing we do except in, certain types of situations. So long way around to say, when we're talking somatic regulation, we're thinking about working with our nervous system, working about regulating our nervous system. And we're specifically talking about entering in through our very physical felt sense experience and working that way. And that lets us access things in a way that often our minds just can't in the same way.
Yeah, that makes total sense. And I feel like this is now more important than ever with the digital age that we live in, and it's so easy to get distracted and even forget that there's this human body that we could be taking care of.
Yes. Completely. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
what is the role of the nervous system in moving through these upper limits that we're talking about?
Yeah. So could we dive a little more into kind of some basics for maybe, like I said,
Absolutely.
people who this whole thing
Yes.
might be a different concept for? I want to just invite, and I'll really invite your listeners to really feel into what we're talking about as we talk. And so much of this work, it can just land in your body as you're listening. So I'll invite just even feeling what it's like as we think about this, that your nervous system is this beautifully complex web of information operating behind the scenes all day, all night. It's responding to energy, to information. It's moderating internally, externally, and responding. And in order to go into talking about upper limits, I want to talk first about when we've been through trauma or prolonged stress or overloads of stress. There's a way that the energy that our nervous systems should ideally meet and discharge can get literally trapped in our bodies. So in an ideal, healthy, functioning nervous system, we meet a stressful situation in the day, there's some kind of response, there's a surge of energy, right? And it moves through us, and then it passes and it goes on. But when there's either been prolonged stress or too much with not enough ability to meet it, that stress can actually literally get trapped in the body. We might call this survival stress that's trapped in our nervous system. And when that happens, there's all of this energy internally for the nervous system to manage. So now it's kind of doing double duty. It's managing the regular day-to-day world, and it's managing this stored energy from the past. What that means is, if you think about when we expand, and now let's talk about upper limits, as we might say. It's a term that was, I think, made popular by Gay Hendricks in the book A Big Leap a while back, talking about what we could call upper limits and, you know, what we're used to and going beyond it. That very concept is stress on our nervous system. Like when we expand, that's going to be more energy to manage, more stress to meet, not even bad stress necessarily, but there's just literally more energy. And if our nervous system is not functioning really well and smoothly and optimally, it's like there's only so much it's got the capacity to manage. And that's what can keep us in what is safe, consciously or unconsciously, because the nervous system literally doesn't have the space, the capacity to take on anymore. It's already doing everything it can.
Yes. Yes. And I do have a question about that, if that's okay. Just, I think it'd be really useful. How would this, let's say we want to blast through that upper limit, we want to consciously, but the nervous system's not feeling safe, or it's struggling to deal with all of that. How would that manifest for someone who wants to blast through the upper limit, but the nervous system isn't quite allowing that process? How would that manifest for somebody?
Such a great question. And there can be so many different ways. I think a short answer is that our nervous systems form particular patterns of what they feel safe with. One way that it can manifest is actually physical health stuff going on, whether that is anything from, you know, headaches to exhaustion to hormones getting out of whack. If the body is not optimally flowing all the energy through in a way that's easy and clear and clean, and the energy is going to get out of whack, I think physical stuff going on, and what that looks like, of course, is going to depend on each person's physiology and what's going on with them. But that is one really common way that it can literally stop us. Otherwise, certainly, you know, anxiety, just feeling a lot of stressful energy, and maybe anxiety that might even feel like it doesn't make sense, or like, where's this coming from? Or why am I this activated about something that I, quote unquote, should have? Something I've commonly work with clients is, you know, they've been going along doing things the way they've been doing them for years. I'm thinking in particular about a lovely client who's a very successful business owner and is used to managing all the things. And then this was a while back, but of course the pandemic hit and huge load of stress, and the business went, you know, into all the things. And all of a sudden, my client found that the day-to-day tasks of managing her business that she could do in her sleep were causing her anxiety, were causing her stress, were causing frustration. Because again, we've got that sense of so much energy that is being managed, that then you add on one little task and no, I can't anymore. So it can look often, I think, like that, like frustration, anxiety, irritability is a biggie, lashing out at people you love with, you know, in a way that doesn't make sense. You just think of, it's like there's more energy in the system than it knows what to do with, and it's got to kind of respond somehow.
Yes. So I'd love to know what happened with your client, because examples, I love hearing examples. It really helps us, you know, feel into this experience. How did you work with her in regulating her nervous system and what happened for her after that.
Yeah. So, let me see where to dive in. When I work with clients, this is a process that we do over, at a minimum, a few months. It's not a quick fix because our nervous systems don't change gears from what they've been doing their whole lives in a session, in my experience. Not to put limits on what we can do, but typically our bodies and our physiology needs to relearn how to be in response to stress and how to react differently. So the way we do that typically involves, in the way it looked with this client, there's first usually a process of learning to come into the body more. Going back to what we were saying about the digital age, we tend to be very much in our heads to manage everything. And one of the first steps is actually consciously learning some basic tools to drop down into the body and start to feel and sense what's going on and work with what's happening on a body level. And this does a couple of things. We can start to bring in some settling and some soothing and some different responses, sometimes right away. But it's not necessarily about like making things better immediately. It's also about learning to let everything that the body is experiencing be safe to feel. And that's the big key, is learning to come into the body's experience and be with all the energy, including the uncomfortable parts, without shutting down, jumping back into the head, without the body going into what we might call management strategies that it's used to doing. And so in this particular client's case, we did a lot of that, a lot of coming into the body, creating the safety. I also do a lot of simply education of all of this stuff that we're talking about, because as we get it, our minds and bodies kind of go, oh, okay, that makes sense. And I can start to be with what's happening in a different way.
Yeah.
And that creates more space around it. And then we start working with discharging this energy, because often there's energy, again, that has been stored in the physiology that actually wants to move. It wants to release. It needs to be felt. And in sessions together, we work very specifically with meeting that stored survival stress in a safe way so that it can be felt, so that it can discharge, so that it can release. And that creates an entirely different experience in the physiology. So in this client's particular example, she had a whole host of wacky stuff going on with her health that had like sprung up over the year, from insomnia to just racing heart to numbness in her hands and feet to weight gain that didn't make any sense. She takes amazing care of herself, doing all the things already, but things weren't working. Like the things she was doing weren't working is often a key that there's something deeper. So the very first things that happened were all the crazy stuff with the heart and the numbness, and the crazy levels of insomnia went away. So her body went back to some more normal. From there, she lost the weight she had gained. She went back to what she called herself, her normal self of being able to manage her staff, grow her business, which she's now doing now. Her business is now expanding even more, new locations, all the things. But it's about that like feeling good in your life and in doing all these things that we're here to do. And so that was really the big key, was getting back into just feeling good of all the things she typically loved to do.
Yeah.
And had
so good.
Gotten separated from.
So good to hear. Yay. And for the listeners, I'd love to hear if you have any tips or tricks? This sounds like you said it's a um, it's a long-term game, but
Mhm.
also very natural. It feels like it's how we're supposed to be.
Yes, yes, yes.
Yeah.
That
So,
is it. It is.
yeah.
Go ahead.
So,
Yeah, any
so what
more?
would
Want me to
you,
go and share? Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, darling.
go ahead. No, I'm like so excited here. I'm like, we're talking over
Yeah.
each other.
So what would you recommend to some of the listeners that are maybe wanting to dive into this a bit further for the first time, some things that maybe they
Mhm.
can start doing on their own, and then we'll move into, how maybe they can connect with you to receive deeper support.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a few key things. And I love what you just said. Yeah, it's a long-term game. And yes, our bodies know how to do this. That is the
Mm-hmm.
key. Like
Mm.
we're, it's, it, it's funny because sometimes I use the word teaching our bodies how to XYZ, but it's not really teaching our bodies. It's remembering, it's
Yeah.
reconnecting.
Yeah.
And so holding that as a foundation is so helpful and important. And with that, I think there's a couple key things that people can do immediately to start bringing in more space and more capacity for moving towards regulation. And they're going to sound really simple because, again, they are. It's what our bodies know how to do. We just forget. But the first is the very simple pause.
Mm-hmm.
Pausing to give space to what is happening is huge, huge. Because when we don't run over or run past or override the natural response that our body is having in any moment, it gets to actually have that response. And
Yeah.
that might sound so obvious, but
Mhm.
we spend so much of our time doing what we think we're supposed to be doing and kind of running over the actual organic experience that we're having.
Mm-hmm.
This is especially important if there is something stressful that you go through. Let's say you're like almost in an accident or are in an accident, and there's this strong reaction in the physiology. One of the best things you can do, like going forward, soon as you know it's safe to do so, pause, give space to whatever you're feeling, let the body have whatever's there, whatever it's going through. And this will kind of take me into the next tidbit, the next piece that I would offer, which is to actually allow the body to feel and move the energy as it wants to. For example, let's say again, there's some stressful, almost car accident, for example. You pull over to the side, you're safe. Oh, your body's going to have a reaction. It might start to shake. It might start to tremble. You might start to cry. There might be anger. There might be, sadness. It might not make sense. But what's key is just letting that energy move through your body and be felt in a way that allows it to simply be there. And that's what that energy needs to do to not get stuck.
Yes.
So giving it the space, giving it the allowance and kind of going with, maybe your body wants to move. Maybe it wants to like squeeze really hard or hug yourself or pound on something. Whatever that organic response is, that's what's key. That's what needs to happen.
Yeah.
And when we can pause, allow, and let the energy move through the system, you're going to create a much more healthy nervous system going forward in response to stressful events
Yeah.
because the energy doesn't
Beautiful.
get stuck.
Beautiful. And that reminds me of, and I've heard it somewhere else. That's why, animals that experience a trauma, they'll shake and they'll shake it off.
That's it. That's it. Yeah. Yep, 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 yep.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
And I can
yeah.
see how important this really is for the business owners because, business is, when we're on mission, especially, it's so beautiful, but we can have these experiences with other people that are less than desirable, and it can cause a bit of that trauma
Mhm.
in our body. And then we think, well, it's not safe to be seen anymore because someone was mean to
Right.
me. Feels like very similar energy. So honoring that and working
Totally.
through that, and not just sort of pushing it aside or sweeping it under the carpet.
Totally. And that's a biggie. The being seen one is big
Yeah.
because one of our most primal
Yeah.
nervous system fears is getting cast out of the tribe. What happens,
Totally.
on an
Yeah.
evolutionary level, if you got kicked out, you die. So it's
It's a big one.
scary on very primal levels. Yeah,
It so
it's
is.
huge.
Really, really is. This has been fascinating. Thank you so much. And for the listeners that just feel this so deeply, that this is the next stage for them in creating that beautiful, effortless expansion, where can they find you?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm at rachelhardy.com is my website. And I have a Facebook group where we do a lot of this work together, as well as
Awesome.
astrology stuff and other cool things. So
Cool.
we can pop links into um, Facebook and Instagram. I am those places too, and I would love
Beautiful.
to connect.
Thank you. And I'll make sure that those links are in the episode details. Thank you so much again. And thank you to our beautiful listeners for being with us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving us a review, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye bye.